President Trump came into Washington on the promise of cleaning up the swamp. Cleaning up the swamp. Well, the American people say he is failing at doing so, and increasingly so. Look at these numbers right here. Okay, disapprove of Trump on corruption. You obviously want that number to be south of 50%. It was south of 50% at the beginning of Trump's second term. Look at that, 43%. But now, up like a rocket. We're talking nearly 3 in 5 Americans, 59%, disapprove of the job that Donald Trump is doing on corruption. Among independents, it's the exact same trend line. It was south of 50% at the beginning of his second term, 48%. Now it's nearly 2 in 3. The American people are increasingly believing that Donald Trump is not the person to clean up the swamp. If anything, he is now a member of the swamp, and you can see it right here. His disapproval ratings on corruption, something he had promised coming into term number 2, not where you want to be. The majority of Americans think, in fact, they disapprove.
So what is it that has sort of turned them, made them see this very clearly? Because that is a very clear number there, that they think he is the swamp.
Yes, they think he is the swamp. They think he is part of that corrupt swamp. Why is it? Well, it has everything to do with his actions. Say Trump's business interests influence his decisions as president. A very not nice 69% of Americans overall say that Trump's business interests influence his decisions as president. Even 48% of Republicans, 48% of Republicans who have stuck with Donald Trump through thick and thin, who thought that his business acumen, his business experience would be something that would actually help him keep him out of the swamp, now say 48% say his business interests actually influence his decisions as president. When you get 69% overall and nearly half of your own Republican base saying that your business interests actually influence your decisions as president, no wonder your disapproval rating on corruption up like a rocket, jumping up and down.
And the approval rating going down. Sinking into the swamp. How is this all impacting? You're welcome. How is this impacting the Republican Party at large?
As Sarah was saying, you know, that disapproval rating on corruption going up like a rocket, therefore his overall approval rating going down in the swamp. I had to add the dance moves. That is impacting his own party on corruption. The Republican Party can't run on corruption like they might have been able to in past cycles. Party trusted more on corruption. In August of 2025, just a year ago, the Republican Party was more trusted by 8 points. Now the tide is changing. See, we're doing stuff with water here. The tide is changing. Now the Democratic Party is more trusted on corruption by 4 points. If anything, we've obviously already seen, we have seen scandals play out in these midterm elections, in these primary cycles. We saw it on Tuesday night with Corey Mills, and it's sort of starting to remind me a little bit of what might have been going on back in 2006, where that rising tide of Americans thinking that the Republican Party was, in fact, not the party that they trusted more in corruption, led to GOP losing their House majority and their Senate majority as well, and that'd be very welcome news for the Democrats.
When we talk about government spending, and spending is one part of the national debt, how is the president doing right now? What are his numbers on spending?
Yeah, when it comes to the king of debt, as Johnny B. put it, the American people very much do not like the direction that President Trump is taking when it comes to government spending. Look, his numbers have always been not so great on this, but now they're just downright awful. Trump's net approval rating on government spending, you know, you go back to term number 1 at this point, he was 12 points underwater, not too hot to try. But look at this, 34 points underwater. His disapproval rating, 34 points higher than his approval rating, going way down there into the Hudson River. And look at this, among independents, it's minus 58 points among independents, minus 58 points when it comes to government spending. So again, the king of debt, with that debt climbing ever higher, the American people not too hot to trot on the president of the United States.
58 points underwater among independents there. That gets to the question of which party do people think is doing a better job, or do they trust more on spending?
Yeah, you know, normally Republicans want to take that ball and run, right, when it comes to government spending and hold that advantage over Democrats. No longer. No. Take a look here. Okay, party trust more on government spending. You go back to November of 2023, it was the Republicans plus 11 points. Even after the one big beautiful bill was, you know, being spoken about passing, you know, back in 2025, look at this. It was still plus 5 GOP. But look now, where we've added on the Iran war, and now the Democrats hold a 3-point advantage on an issue that Republicans normally dominate on. So this isn't just about President Trump. If you're a Republican running for re-election, you might say, hey, you know, his problems won't necessarily hurt my re-election chances. When it comes to government spending, the party trusted more for the first time in a long time is the Democratic Party.
How do people feel about spending in general?
Yeah, and this might be what is driving this. What is driving this? Say most government spending is wasteful and inefficient. You know, you go back to March of 2025, it was 57%. That's a pretty high number. But you think that's high? Rocket it up. Now we're talking about 3 in 4 Americans. We got these numbers just after the Iran war started. We're talking 75%. 3 in 4 say most government spending is wasteful and inefficient. No wonder President Trump's numbers and the Republican numbers are so bad.
I'll tell you, a picture that can be associated with this is the reflecting pool, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it may not be as much money as a war, but it is something that could stick in their minds. Where do people see this debt going? What are the prediction markets say?
Yeah, you think the debt is high now? Well, hello. Chance that the national debt in Trump's term peaks at over $45 trillion. 92% chance, according to the Kalshi prediction markets. Well, a reflecting pool indeed is reflecting poorly on the President of the United States.
As they say, $1 trillion here, $1 trillion there, sooner or later.
I'll take $1 trillion here.
It adds up to real money.
Net satisfaction of Trump's D.C. building projects. Look at this, 33 points underwater. You can't really get worse than that. That is the dissatisfaction is 33 points higher than the satisfaction rating there. How about among independents? You think that 33 points is low? How about this? Into the Potomac River we go, minus 52 points with independents. Americans want no part of these D.C. renovation building projects that Trump seems to be absolutely in adoration of. He seems to be, perhaps, the only one.
And this group, independents, do you think they'll be pretty important in the midterm
elections? Yeah, you know what?
elections?
It turns out, we've spoken about this, Johnny B. Independents seem to be pretty gosh darn important because they're in the center of the electorate. You win independents, you win elections, you're 52 points underwater with independents. You think those congressional Republicans like Trump talking about these D.C. building projects? Absolutely not, because these are the types of numbers that make election nights go very, very wrong.
So if you ask people where they want the focus, what do they say?
Yeah, okay, so why don't we just ask them, right? It's one thing not to like something, but it's another thing to say, you know what, wannabe IM Pei or Frank Gehry, you're focusing too much on it. All right, Trump administration is focusing too much on the D.C. building changes. 64%, nearly 2 in 3 say that the Trump administration is simply focusing too much on these reconstruction projects. You know where they want the focus to be? They want it to actually be on the reasons that Donald Trump got reelected to a second term. That is lowering prices. But guess what they say? They say the Trump administration is focusing too little on lowering prices. 78%. We're talking 4 in 5. About 4 in 5 Americans say that the Trump administration is focusing too little on the reason that Donald Trump got reelected to a second term. No wonder that Donald Trump has historically high disapproval ratings on inflation, historically low approval ratings on inflation, and the only one ever to cross the minus 50-point net approval rating barrier on inflation, Donald John Trump, because they think he's not even focusing on the reason why he got reelected.
What do they think about where the money is being spent?
Yeah, I think this gets exactly it, Johnny B. You know what? I didn't feel like we spoke about this enough yesterday. Say most government spending is wasteful and inefficient. You know what? That number is always high, but now it's way, way high, historically high. Look at this, 75% earlier this year compared to just 57% a little bit over a year ago. That number is going higher, and no wonder it is when they feel like the Trump administration, and Donald Trump in particular, is focusing on the wrong things and spending the money that, simply put, is making the debt grow ever higher.
And it's Donald Trump, the president of the United States, the one out showing reporters the driveway, and Democrats may very well be saying, keep showing us the grand driveway.
Thank you for this beautiful gift you've given us. Democratic socialism is no longer just a polling phenomenon. It is in the real world. We are seeing actual candidates winning primaries. What are we talking about? Well, we're talking about this. DSA or DSA endorsed congressional candidates currently in Congress. There is just 1, 2. Now we're talking about 4 times as many, 8 candidates who have won 2026 primaries, and 7 of those are favorites to win in the fall, win in the general election. So the Democratic Socialists of America's ranks in Congress, they are definitely growing, getting larger.
All right, so where are these wins happening? Is there a specific area, or what are you seeing with the numbers?
Yeah, okay, you might just say, oh, this is just a phenomenon in the Northeast. This is part of the Acela corridor. This is just an urban phenomenon. No, not really. I mean, take a look here. Where DSA candidates won primaries for Congress, they're all Democrats. Yeah, you got 3 in New York, but you got 2 in Michigan, you got 1 in Colorado, you got 1 in Florida last night running for the Senate, and you got 1 in Pennsylvania. So this is not just a Northeast phenomenon in terms of these DSA candidates who are winning primaries. Yes, they are primarily in urban areas, but they are happening across the map, from the Northeast to the Midwest, to the Mountain West, and then last night down in the South in Florida. So this is happening across the political map. We are seeing these DSA candidates winning in Democratic primaries. As I said, they are becoming a larger part of the Democratic primary, not just in the polling data, but actual people casting their ballots, casting their votes for these DSA candidates.
Give us some idea what the percentages are here of the wins versus the loss, because there are more DSA candidates out there, it appears.
Yeah, okay. So the thing that I will note is even though the DSA is growing to be a larger part of the Democratic Party, right, they are not the majority of the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party is still primarily non-DSA members. You could see it here. DSA endorsed congressional candidates won their primaries. Yes, we have 8. But look at this. At least 17 have lost their primaries. At least 17 have lost their primaries. So they're batting about 33%, right? Or a little bit there, which is pretty good for a baseball hitter, right? But not particularly good in terms of actually becoming a majority of the party. So yes, the DSA is growing. It is becoming a larger phenomenon, but it is not yet one that has taken over the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party is still full of traditional Democrats, not those who are coming in and trying to implement DSA ideology.
Right, and you have to note, this is the primary. This is not the general election yet.
This is not the general election, and I know Angie Nixon had a good night last night, but she is an underdog in Florida. She is the one of the 8 who have won who is most likely not going to win in the general election. The test of whether the DSA holds in a general election, that is one that we haven't really quite tested just yet. He is reaching record lows yet again. He is losing. Just take a look here. Okay, Trump net approval hits a term 2 low. Look at this. 31 points underwater. 31 points underwater according to Ipsos, the Reuters Ipsos poll. Look where he was at the beginning of term number 2. He was at plus 6 points. So he is down, what is that? The math quickly with me. 37 points from where he was at the beginning of his second presidency. You know, President Trump was unpopular going into the midterms during his first presidency, but not anywhere as unpopular as this. He was 12 points underwater. So he is doing, versus where he was at term number 1 at this point, he is doing, what is the math here quickly? He is doing 19 points worse than he was doing in term number 1 at this point. And of course, those midterms were quite disastrous for the Republican Party. So you look at these numbers and you just go, oy vey if you're a Republican.
All right. Independents have a big role to play always in elections. Give us some sense of where they stand, because there is still a lot of the party that supports Donald Trump.
Yeah, okay. So, you know what? Republicans still, in large part, support Donald Trump. But as independents, who are the name of the game, they are the driver in elections. And just look at why these numbers are falling the way that they are. It is because of independents. Look at these drops. I mean, Trump's net approval rating among independents, term 2, he's 47 points underwater now. 47 points underwater. He was at minus 1 point at the beginning of his presidency, basically treading water, right? So what is that? That's a 46-point drop. So you see that drop of, what, 31 points from where he was at the beginning of his presidency, or 37 points from where he was at the beginning of his presidency among the overall electorate. But that's nothing compared to this 46-point drop among independents. And compare that to where he was at this point in term number 1 before those midterms. Again, he was underwater then, but he was just 10 points underwater then. Now he's 47 points underwater. So that's a drop of what? 37 points? So this has been the problem with President Trump's second term, according to the public, which is he is going and placating the base, but leaving the center of the electorate behind. But you know what? You have to win the center of the electorate in order to maintain your popularity, in order for Republicans to win in these midterm elections. But independents are saying, you know what? We don't like what's going on. See you later.
Yeah, and the big question is, do they show up and vote for a Democrat, or do they not show up? Those are always the questions that you have to ask. I do want to ask you about what this might mean historically when you look at these abysmal numbers for the president and his approval rating the lowest of his presidency, what it might mean for the midterms.
Yeah, what might it mean for the midterms? I was teasing 2018, but you have to go further back in history to really find the true analog in my mind. and it's George W. Bush. Look at this. Presidential net approval rating, according to Ipsos, at this point pre-midterm. Look at this. Trump, 31 points underwater. Bush was also 31 points underwater. George W. Bush, at this point before the 2006 midterm, Republicans lost not just the House, but the United States Senate as well. And if these numbers hold and this historical analogy holds, Democrats will have a very happy election night and election week afterwards, indeed. The sun is shining in the Sunshine State, the great state of Florida. And this is a state that, simply put, has been taken off the board for the most part for Democrats. And we're talking about, we'll start off first in that Senate race, that special Senate election, right, where Angie Nixon won that Democratic primary. Ashley Moody is saying, thank you, God. Thank you, God. The chance that the GOP wins the Florida Senate race, according to Couch Prediction Markets, Ashley Moody, it was 84% on Sunday. Look where it is now. A 95% chance, up like a rocket. It turns out that nominating a self-described Democratic socialist in a state like Florida, where there are a lot of, let's say, Cuban refugees, is not necessarily the smartest idea. The Democratic Party and those Democratic voters essentially probably taking this race off the board come November.
The chances of Republicans, they're higher now. And part of that reason is because of just these huge shifts that have been happening in Florida over the last few years.
Yeah, I mean, Republicans, I remember back in the day, oh, Florida's diversifying, right? That means it'll become more Democratic. Not the case at all. The state has become considerably more Republican. Look at these party registration trends. Look at this. Back in 2016, Democrats had a 3-point edge in party registration over Republicans. By the time of the 2024 election, look at that. It was an 8-point edge for Republicans. You think that's high? Now it's an 11-point edge for the Republican Party. Republicans have gained in a state that Democrats were hoping to make competitive in the 21st century, become more Democratic. In fact, the exact inverse has occurred. It has become considerably more Republican, and Republicans, simply put, have been winning all of the statewide races, the major statewide races. They haven't even elected a Democratic governor since, 1994 in Lawton Childs? My goodness gracious.
Walk-in Lawton Childs there. Nice reference there. And the congressional delegation also becoming more Republican through redistricting, but also through these shifts.
Through these shifts as well, right? There was a Florida redistricting. The state's becoming more Republican. Democrats are doing well in a lot of other states, but not in Florida. Look at this. It's not just the U.S. Senate race. How about U.S. House seats in Florida? 2 to 3 seats pickups are possible this November. So we're seeing it in the federal elections at the top, and we're also seeing it down in the U.S. House of Representatives. It is a state that is moving to the right, despite a lot of Democrats believing that the diversification would lead it to the left.
And I think one of the most important things to point out is this just isn't a now thing. This has potential implications. Florida turning more red has potential implications going forward.
Yeah, one thing you don't want is to be losing ground in a state that is gaining population. And you're talking about, look at this, Florida electoral votes back in the 1990s, right? The last time that was when the Democrats got their last governor, there was 25. Look at that, 27 by the 2000s, 29 by the 2010s, 30 by the 2020s, and then the 2030 outlook is for more population, 32 electoral votes, and it's now solidly in the Republican camp.